In the 1980s and 90s and well into this century, Indiana tended to view economic development as the enticement of high-profile, high-tech, high-wage manufacturers, ideally from other states, if not other countries. More recently, many Hoosiers, including a fair number of policymakers, have called for greater transparency in such matters and for a shift in emphasis, namely to the cultivation of smaller, more prosaic employers already established in Indiana. Hi, I'm John Schwanison. On this week's show, we'll look at efforts unfolding this session to recalibrate the state's economic development strategy. Indiana Lawmakers, from the State House to your house.
Indiana Lawmakers is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by the Indy Chamber, working to unite business and community to maintain a strong economy and quality of life.
Here's Indiana's economic development by the numbers. Over 80% of Indiana's land is dedicated to farms and forests, and agriculture plays a substantial role in the state's productivity. Indiana is the fourth largest producer of corn and the fifth largest producer of soybeans. These two cash crops account for nearly 60% of all agricultural output in the state, and Indiana also contributes to the nation's pork, poultry, eggs, and dairy products. Manufacturing continues to dominate Indiana's economy, though. The state ranks second in overall automobile production, with 1 in 5 Hoosiers employed in advanced manufacturing. Indiana boasts over 9,000 manufacturing operations across the state, leading to high employment numbers and high-quality jobs. Innovations in semiconductors, AI, and other technologies attract new businesses, particularly in advanced manufacturing. Technology companies, including Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, have committed to a $15 billion investment to create and maintain data centers. This would boost economic growth and output, but the construction of data centers would have a major impact on the environment, and the production of energy requires significant costs to maintain. Indiana's unemployment rate mirrors that of the national average, coming in at 4.1%. The unemployment rate, both in the state and across the country, is considered to be a strong indicator of a healthy economy. Experts estimate that unemployment in Indiana will continue to be lower than the national average, a byproduct of a skilled workforce, diversified economic opportunities, and policies incentivizing participation. And I am pleased to welcome Republican Representative Jake Teshka of North Liberty, Democratic Senator J.D. Ford of Indianapolis, Republican Representative Danny Lopez of Carmel, and Democratic Representative Matt Pierce of Bloomington. Thank you all for being here. The first week of the session, the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, just, I'm sure by coincidence, put out a study recounting its successes over the previous 8 years. So let me ask you, now we've got all this legislation to change course. What happened to if it ain't broke, don't fix it? Let me start with you, Jake Teshka.
Well, thanks for the question, and certainly want to recognize the growth in the state and the good work that's been done and all the capital expenditure that we've attracted. I think there's a lot that goes into that. What we've recognized and what I've recognized over the last several years that I've been in the legislature is that while we continuously rank as one of the top states to start a business, I think number 2, in Forbes or CNBC, we consistently lag in actual new business starts. And so I started several sessions ago to try and dig in and find out why is that, and is there a way that we can move the needle? And so for the last several sessions, I've worked on different policies like a regulatory sandbox to help our startups, a Right to Start Act. We combined those one year, and so we've really tried to hone in on this entrepreneurship startup kind of thing. What we know is that most net new jobs in this country come from those firms that are 5 years or younger, right? That our larger firms tend to add and shed jobs at roughly the same rate. And so, my passion here is really to try and encourage entrepreneurship. That's why I offered House Bill 1172 this year to create the Office of Entrepreneurship, which aligns with one of the governor's priorities in terms of his new vertical. And really, that's not to take anything away from IEDC or anything like that, but really just to refocus and make sure that we are spending adequate time and energy on our entrepreneurs and small businesses in the state to grow them from the ground up.
J.D. Ford, I get the impression when you look at the past 8 years, it's almost as if looking at the U.S. economy in 2024. Some people said the market's booming, profits are up, some people are going gangbusters, and yet people were hurting, obviously, and we saw the results in November. Is this sort of a similar situation in that it's not a statewide issue? There are pockets where it's booming?
There are certain places in Indiana that is getting the extra dollars, right? You mentioned earlier in the opening, if it's not broke, don't fix it. I think all you have to do is just travel up 65 and ask any of the farmers in Boone County. They would tell you that it's definitely broke. I feel like even I don't represent them, but they were even contacting me to say we need help. No, we just don't feel like anyone's listening to us. And I think that was part of the problem with IEDC, is that they were always constantly coming back to the legislature asking for additional dollars, but really there were no guardrails or expectations for the money, and we should know what the ROI of that's going to be. So I think
upwards of $1 billion, I guess, just in the past couple budget cycles.
And even for the small businesses, it's great that we're dumping all this money and welcoming these large businesses like Meta and Facebook. But small businesses in my area are saying, what about us? What about our cut of this pie?
What about the LEAP district? Again, that's not your district, but your neighbors.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a huge project. Was it 900 acres? The idea was to make sure it's shovel ready, it's nimble, it can move. So far, Lily's there and some other, but there's still plenty of room of those 900 acres.
Sure. I mean,
and was that what really drove a lot of this frustration?
I think ultimately this will be one of the most consequential projects long term that the state has seen from an economic development standpoint. I think it certainly has brought to light some issues of transparency and other things that we've tried to address in the legislature this year, which isn't surprising. We created IEDC 20-ish years ago, and this has been a continual sort of issue that has festered from time to time. And it is true that there has to be greater transparency, and beyond transparency, better communication between the state, the IEDC, our economic development apparatus, and locals. I think that's incredibly important. But I will say, and I continue to sort of harp on this both on the floor and in the caucuses, we've got to make sure that we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The reality is that we've diversified our economy over the last 20 years. And of course, we can talk about the last 8, but truly it's been 20 years of putting things in place to make us competitive with Ohio and Georgia and Florida and every other state, Tennessee, every other state in the country, which we weren't competing with before. And I mean, you pointed to the study or the report that IEDC put out. We had 3 consecutive years of CapEx investment records. But beyond that, I mean, just last month, we had BioCrossroads put out, we are now the #1 state for life sciences products exporting, which used to be California. It was the gold standard. It's a $100 billion industry in our state. It's statewide. And it isn't just Lilly. Lilly obviously is a big piece of this, but it's Mead Johnson and it's Roche Diagnostics and it's Cook Medical. So we've got an ecosystem that we've created over time. And I think that's something that we need to, number one, be proud of, continue to sell, certainly strengthen, certainly continue to work on, which is what I think you've seen. I think the aiming at smaller businesses and the supply chain is important. But again, we shouldn't be throwing the baby out with the bathwater because it truly has been a transformative. So you want to keep
doing that, but do these other sorts of things too. Matt Pierce, now you represent that little institution called Indiana University, the Bloomington campus. Do you feel that Bloomington in your area has benefited from the past 8 years or let's go back to 20 years that IEDC has been in place? It was created in 2005, so almost 20 years. Or are you on the outside looking in?
Well, I think the biggest problem is that the General Assembly created a black box of IEDC. It's hard to know really what's going on inside IEDC. And what we saw is they got out in front of their skis on this LEAP district, and there's really not any oversight. I mean, it's interesting how the IEDC suddenly became land developers, right? And no one ever came to the legislature and said, we would like you to pass legislation to authorize us to be land developers. And yet they went ahead and did it. And so the House Democrats have been attempting to get some significant oversight of IEDC to actually understand what they're doing and make sure that the legislature is providing some guidance on what they do. And so far, we have not been able to get our Republican colleagues to join us in that, but we're going to keep pushing for it.
Well, there was no legislation saying they should get in the land speculation or land development business, but lawmakers, I don't know how you voted on that particular budget, but did in the most recent budget cycle, I think it was $500 million to be ready to develop and to acquire land at a moment's notice. Was that a mistake in hindsight?
Look, I don't know that was a mistake. I think Representative Lopez hit on some of these things where these are minor tweaks to ensure that the communication's right, that the transparency is right. In my district, we've got an $11 billion Amazon data center going up. Right next door is a $3.5 billion GM plant that's under construction. And the folks in my district had some concerns initially, right? I think that a lot of folks have come on board since then. But I think it was less about the projects themselves and more about the communication or lack thereof, and the feeling that this was being done without their input. And so I think we've learned some things through that, right? And I think that we're trying to address that, and I know that Secretary Adams and others are working hard at that as well. And so I'm actually confident that in the future we can get better at this, and we can continue to move the needle, make sure that Indiana remains a state that companies large and small want to move to, and that entrepreneurs can be successful as well.
Well, let's talk about a few of the specific bills. Some of the things, a lot of bills, I think more than a dozen were introduced this session. And a lot of them didn't get a hearing, not surprisingly. And those things tended to be dramatic leadership changes in the IEDC or dramatic funding changes, not just a reduction, but changing the pipeline of funding. And these types of things, or putting lawmakers as non-voting members, et cetera, et cetera. Other bills seem to be earning a fair amount of support, and three of you are on one bill. J.D. Ford, talk about that one, what you hope to accomplish there.
Yeah, so actually, if it would be okay, I'd like to, Representative Teshka talked about the data centers, and I actually had a bill, Senate Bill 135, did not get a hearing. But a lot of the concerns that I'm hearing all across the state, particularly there's a data center going into Franklin Township right now. There's a lot of folks that are finding my bill and saying, well, why can't this be in policy now? And essentially what that bill would say is that if you want to put a data center in the permitting process, the company who is trying to develop it should disclose how much water they're going to use, how much electricity they're going to use, and then once it's operational, then continue to report exactly how much electricity and how much water they are using. Right now it's concerning to me because President Trump was at Mar-a-Lago and announced that he's securing extra funding from an Emirati billionaire to basically dump all this money into these data centers all across the United States. Well, Indiana's on that list. And so I think we're going to see a huge influx of these data centers. And if that's the case, then there should be some transparency on the front end. And we should be collecting this data and looking at it to make sure that we're making good decisions. I think that's really what people are looking for in this.
And you talk about the utility usage and disclosure up front. And I guess not to dwell on the LEAP district, but one more, for those who haven't followed it, one of the beefs about that, in addition to the lack of transparency, was the use of water. Right. The notion that there wouldn't be enough water there, and so the notion of pulling it from Tippecanoe County or a different water basin, and that is, I guess, what the notion makes very sensitive.
And say an IEDC, went out and found a company that would write a very favorable report saying, oh yeah, it's okay to take 100 million gallons of water from the Wabash. And so I think people looked at that report with a little bit of a skeptical eye about that.
You mentioned data centers, and that seems to be a big push nationally now. Some organizations called for a moratorium on these because of the energy consumption until we get that part of the equation. Because I'm always intrigued when we talk about economic development. Some people say it's about low taxes, business taxes. Some people say it's about quality of life. Some people say it's about infrastructure and energy. I mean,
it's a combination.
Is it okay? You anticipated my question. Is it all of those things? It can't be one more than the other. It's simply not incentives that we.
It isn't just incentives. That's true. That much we know. It is certainly quality of place. It's investment in amenities that are made at the local level that entice companies to move there so that they can, knowing they can attract employees. It's obviously our tax structure. It's other things that we put in place. I think it's our workforce. It's things that we've done to make ourselves competitive, for sure. It's not a one-size-fits-all. I think this, I'm listening to this conversation. I think this all really comes down to balance and figuring out how you properly balance. Number one, the mix of economic development that you're having, that you're attracting to the state or that you're growing here. Not every region is the same. Not every region is going to have the same economic strategy. So that's certainly true. And then I think it's a proper balance between appropriate oversight and appropriate transparency, and ensuring that your economic development leadership is can be nimble enough to go be competitive. Let's not kid ourselves. I mean, when it comes to things like foreign direct investment or CapEx investment or job relocation, business relocation, we are in competition. We are in competition. CEOs don't negotiate in public, and we are in competition against our peer states. And so our teams at the state level have to be nimble enough and flexible enough with proper oversight to be able to go out and compete for these.
And I'm old enough to remember back in 2005 when it was fairly controversial and there was the move toward IEDC, which took the place of what some said was a rather stodgy Department of Commerce, which did have transparency and did operate as a traditional state agency. Is there a concern with all these reforms in terms of transparency, in terms of notification, say if you're going to buy now, if IEDC is going to acquire 100 acres all at once or in parcels, there has to be notification of locals and of the budget committee 30 days in advance. Are you worried at all that, gee, there was a reason they shifted to this plan nearly 20 years ago? Are we kind of screwing it by going the other direction now? And will we lose our competitiveness?
Well, I mean, it's the people's money, right? It's tax dollars that hard-earned people have paid into the state. And I think that they have a right to kind of know what's happening with that money.
Even if we don't outmaneuver California or Illinois.
I mean, interesting to me, it's the question I've always asked myself going back 30 years ago when I served in the Bloomington City Council and you'd vote on tax abatements. You'd always ask yourself, this subsidy that we're providing to this corporation that's coming in, is this a subsidy that's making a project possible that otherwise wouldn't happen, or are we just sweetening the bottom line of the corporation with tax dollars? And I think that's a question that it's difficult to judge when you have the IEDC kind of working within that area. And so we have big discussions about how many jobs and what's the wage for the job. At the end of the day, you just wonder whether these corporations just don't know they can play states off of each other and they can just basically garner a subsidy when they were going to do the project anyway and they knew where they were going to do it. So the question is, are we getting played by people, or are we actually helping companies come here that otherwise wouldn't? And that's the question you have to figure out.
That's sort of, you never know, and sometimes the jobs don't materialize, and then you go through the clawback provisions to try to get.
And I don't know that that's an illegitimate concern, right? So
the notion that these things might not materialize
well,
with the promised
and
jobs,
the idea that that corporations are now used to the idea of state shopping and ensuring that they're getting the best deal. Look, I was on city council as well in South Bend, and I often ask myself the same question, right? That's the but-for test. But for this, would this company move here or remain here kind of deal? The reality, however, though, as Representative Lopez pointed out, we are in direct competition with many states, Tennessee, as you mentioned, Ohio, others. And so when we're out there looking for these deals, we have to be realistic about what's going on. And unless we're somehow going to enter into some multi-state compact with those that we compete with most to say, all right, no more, and we're just going to compete on overall tax climate and workforce and all those sorts of things, it's kind of hard to get away from, I think, some of the incentive thing. And so
something tells me that Indiana-Illinois Cooperative Pact is not going to go very well,
right.
But maybe I'm wrong.
I have to tell you, John, that if I were king for the day, I would have a U.S. constitutional amendment that forbid these subsidies, right? Because it's kind of like, in the world of college sports now with NIL money stuff. You got to play whether you like it or not, right? And I think that if you had a way to have other states, if all states had a compact, say we're just not going to spend our dollars in these kinds of subsidies, we'll just compete on our infrastructure and our workforce. It does
come down to workforce and infrastructure
and those kinds of things. I think we'd be all better off, but you can't kind of unilaterally disarm. You kind of have to play in that world whether you like it or not.
Are you anyone worried that as we compete with other states and we try to attract out of non-domestic companies, and maybe other states, maybe everybody's sort of in the same boat, so maybe it's not that much of a competitive disadvantage. Should we be worried about those kinds of things as we compete vis-a-vis other states?
Yeah, I mean, the letter from the Congress to the Purdue president, was very concerning.
This was about foreign
students, and I don't know, why the representative sent that letter, but we should be welcoming those students here, especially if they're here to, provide a resource to the United States in regards to research and other things of that nature. So yeah, we definitely should be concerned, I think.
John, I just add, look, I feel like I've got a little bit of a unique perspective, obviously having been on now both sides of this, on the executive and the legislative.
And state and federal, and you got a lot of different facets of that, yeah.
I've been hearing this argument about how, the progressive folks won't come, and for sure, I agree 100%. We've got to be, it is a piece of the economic development strategy. We do have to be a welcoming place and a place that actively wants to attract people, talent, and keep talent here, that we're growing. I will say that, the numbers speak for themselves. New York Times had the rankings of net immigration last month, and we're number 7 in the country. We're the only state in the Midwest that continues to grow, and this isn't a new phenomenon. This has been going on for several years, while other states in our region are losing. So people are voting with their feet. They're coming to places largely in our district, in Hamilton County or our districts, but really across the state. And people,
red herring, really.
People are. I would just say that. That it's certainly a factor, but more importantly are we building an ecosystem here where companies want to be? And the other thing I'd say in this whole conversation, we're talking a lot about these incentives and other things because they come up in these bills, and we're having the conversation during session.
Well, they get all the attention, the headlines.
But it's just a piece of what the IEDC does or the economic development apparatus does. We're growing homegrown companies. We're attracting and retaining talent. We're doing things like investing in a tourism and sports bid fund to continue to grow. We've got the best facilities in the country, bar none.
I did want to bring that up
state.
because we're talking about agriculture. That's been a governor's push, and it's clearly the supermajority push in both the chambers. We talk about biosciences, the other things. Well, look, you bring up a good topic, sports. There's a bill that would require IEDC to study how to get a better foothold in terms of esports in our state. Another one was dealing with how we can be more of a mecca for professional wrestling. I don't think that one necessarily is going to get a hearing. I should check before I declare it dead. But and then there, of course, is the new Northwest Indiana Pro Sports Commission, which I think you were alluding to. You work for the Pacers, and I mean, how important is sports in this whole mix? I mean, people love to criticize because $1 million athletes get all this. I think
sports is I think especially for the city of Indianapolis and the ripple effect that has. If you just look at the events that we've hosted recently, right? And I brought my son down for the Tennessee-Houston game, right? Of course, during COVID, we hosted the whole tournament. We've hosted NBA All-Star, all of these sorts of things.
You don't begrudge Indianapolis, because some people from upstate and downstate, that's been an issue.
Yeah, I don't.
A lot of micromanaging of Indianapolis.
Well, there's another. That's next week's show.
I think it's important. I think it's an important aspect of who we are, and I think Indianapolis does a great job in hosting conventions, hosting events. We're number 2 in the country on that point. And so I think that's good for the whole state. I don't think that's just necessarily something that's good for Indianapolis. I think, as I said, there are ripple effects to that. And when you look out even broader, I mean, you've got this now youth sports atmosphere, right, throughout the whole state, where it's Grand Park up by me. Now we've got a great facility in Mishawaka, and I know there's other places in the states that are trying to attract those youth sports as well.
Yeah, the Sports and Tourism Bid Fund is a good example of really a statewide impact. 30% of those dollars are mandated to go outside of Marion County. And you mentioned, sort of tongue-in-cheek, the wrestling aspect. Because I happen to sit on the executive committee for Sports Corp.
Is that bill still alive?
No, but with the Sports and Tourism Bid Fund, we were able to leverage that. Our team at Sports Corp was able, which is Indiana Sports Corp, not Indianapolis, was able to leverage that into a 10-year deal with WWE.
Indiana Pacers, not Indianapolis.
So WWE is a massive entertainment company, and a 10-year commitment with WrestleMania coming. The economic impact of that is massive, and that's a great example of how this isn't just about incentives to have companies relocate from one state to another. It's also what kinds of investments are we making here?
I think we've probably actually, if you look at it, we've invested in tourism, because anytime you can get people to come in and spend some time, leave a lot of money behind, and then leave, that's kind of a win-win. They come and they put money here, and so that's why these tournaments and things are important, because you're bringing people in and they're spending a lot of money here, and then they go off and they don't burden your infrastructure for long term. So those are good things. And I think that we could probably do actually a little bit better job of promoting tourism, beyond the sports realm. Although I think another intangible too is, when we host a major event like a Super Bowl or playoff games or something, people all across the country, they see Indianapolis, they hear about Indianapolis, and I think we're a flyover country to a lot of people. So I think that anytime we can get people focused on Indiana as something more than just the Indy 500, we're probably doing well.
Well, I know you've promised to guaranteed, I think, essentially a return to the Final Four next year for IU. So I hope you can deliver on your campaign promises. Are we, quickly, because I do want to wrap up talking about tariffs, but we've talked sports, we've talked agriculture, we've talked about, are we covering all the bases, J.D. Ford, or is there something that we're missing?
Yeah, no, I think, obviously people come, to Indiana for all the things that mentioned on the panel today, but we also have to create opportunities after work. So that, the 5 to 9, as they say, and so I want us to continue to keep that in the forefront. We don't have an ocean, we don't have mountains, so we have to keep our, our citizens busy. So, parks and funding for trails and things of that nature, I think is huge. And also, a lot of people come to our districts because we have good public schools, and so making sure that they're fully funded, I think is going to be a thing at the top of my mind as we approach the budget.
All right, before we go, got to ask you about the tariffs. I mean, everybody's an expert nobody has a crystal ball, but you guys are best experts we got here in the studio. Is this going to help Indiana, hurt Indiana? How worried are you?
Look, I think we're getting to that point where we're gonna find out. As you said, I don't even know that anybody here is an expert, and certainly not an expert on what the administration might do, might not do, and how these things might impact us. But I think it's certainly it's something that has caused some uncertainty. I think some uncertainty in the budget, some uncertainty in out in the marketplace. Now, whether or not that's the right policy, and if that's a short-term hiccup that we're going to get over, and at the end of this, we'll be grateful that we had that kind of bargaining chip. That's to be seen, and so I'll reserve my judgment on that.
I'm guessing there might be a contrary opinion. I know some of the automakers are retooling so that, say, Toyota can make vehicles, or Greensburg with Honda here as opposed to Mexico and other places, perhaps. Is that what's supposed to happening?
I think it's a pretty chaotic situation, and I think it's difficult for the economists to figure out exactly what the strategy really is, because it's just all over the place, and we're attacking our neighbors, and we're tying tariffs to things like fentanyl coming in that are not really related to economic development or creating jobs here. And I think as long as you have this constant uncertainty day after day, I hear from business people, the one thing they hate more than anything is uncertainty. They want to know. I hear so often when we talk about regulation, they say, just tell me what the rules are and be consistent with them, and we will adjust. Don't be making everything willy-nilly and jumbling everything around. And I think that's where we are right now.
Final seconds. I know you guys need to weigh in. Good thing or bad thing, Ned?
We'll see.
We'll see.
To be seen. Right. But certainly it's hard to argue with some of what Matt said. I agree.
Stability is key. All right.
Double-edged sword. I hope that the sword leans on the side of benefits to our state.
And I guess we will know, when the next quarterly reports from some of the publicly traded companies come out, or we see some of the economic data, we'll have a better sense. All right. Don't forget that Final Four commitment that you made.
There you go.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge, your passion on this important issue that really is the future of Indiana. I thank you all. Again, my guests have been Republican Representative Jake Teshka of North Liberty, Democratic Senator J.D. Ford of Indianapolis, Republican Representative Danny Lopez of Carmel, and Democratic Representative Matt Pierce of Bloomington. We all know what rolls downhill, right? No, not that. I'm talking about the responsibility to deliver critical services despite major funding cuts, and that has local public officials bracing for impact on the next Indiana Lawmakers.
Indiana Lawmakers is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by the Indy Chamber, working to unite business and community to maintain a strong economy and quality of life.